Hi, Steve Torres from ElderCareNow. We have a special guest with us today, Mr. Sam Baum, who is the Community Relations Director at the Terraces at Park Merino. And today we're going to just ask him some general questions about assisted living communities. And of course, I have my partner here, Frank Cunningham. So again, welcome, and let's go ahead and get started, okay? Sam, just right off the top of the bat, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm doing great every day.
Great. Well, taking the time out to be with us. I know that even though it's a Saturday, you're working and you're going back to work after you do this podcast with us. So we appreciate it. You know, Sam, being an assisted living elder care placement specialist, are all assisted living communities the same?
They are not. When I work with families, I tell them that the business model in assisted living communities is pretty much the same across the board. There are two things that differentiate communities. One is the physical environment, and one is the culture. The culture, of course, being the most important, in my opinion, right? So those are the things that basically differentiate communities. Is going to be, there are some communities that are 8 stories tall, and there are some that are, single level. So that's the physical environment piece of it, right? And then there's the culture. And the culture is something that can be described, but it's more something that can be felt by the family members who come in to see me. And so culture is huge. And so that's the big differentiator, in my opinion. And I've been doing this for 25 years.
Wow. Well, you have some longevity there and obviously some experience. You know, before we delve a little bit more into some questions, there's a little bit of a long-term relationship you have with Frank, and I think it's really interesting. Frank, maybe you could share with us how you met Sam.
I met Sam on his first day at Terraces of Park Merino with his first customer, who happened to be a little Jewish lady who was a Holocaust survivor. And like I said, it was Sam's first day. And what impressed me about this man is she was in a wheelchair. And he didn't sit at his desk. He got down on his knees so he could look into her eyes and talk with her. And, it says something, the first day there says something about the culture that he has in his place. He got to know this little Jewish lady who was writing her memoirs, the doctor. And they, where were your parents from? Oh, my father was from Lithuania. They went back and forth, and they became fast friends in that process. And I was just blown away by this guy. I'd never seen anything like it. I've been in the business for, at that time, probably 7, 8 years, and nobody did this. Yeah. So, I've always been a fan of this man because that's the way he's operated from day one.
Thank you, Frank. And she ended up moving in, and we had the honor of hearing her whole story of she grew up in Poland, and she and this is the group. I don't know how much of a tangent I can go off on, but I run a group every Friday and Saturday called Social Cafe, and Social Cafe is a storytelling group and a reminiscing group. It's my favorite part of my job. I hear the craziest stories, the funniest stories. We talk about everything. We talk about your first car, your first crush, your first kiss, your first boyfriend, your first girlfriend, your first concert, your favorite music in high school, your best friend when you were, a kid. I mean, we talk about everything, right? And in this group, she shared her whole story. Now, Social Cafe lasts an hour. It took her 4 social cafes to tell her whole story, how the Nazis came into Poland from the West. She lived in Eastern Poland. So she didn't feel any threat until they showed up in her town, at which point she and her family were put in a ghetto. She ended up escaping the ghetto with fake papers. that were provided by a Gentile friend outside the wall of the ghetto. She was hidden by a family in exchange for tutoring their kids. She then found her way to New York City, where she became the first, or one of the first, if not the first, female graduate of Columbia Medical School. She became a renowned physician,
Yep.
author, speaker. She was an amazing woman. And this is what I value about my job is getting to work with people who have this kind of life experience. And I know I'm going off on a tangent, but I tell anyone who will listen, when we see an old person out on the street, sitting on a bench, walking in the grocery store, whatever, we look at that person and we see an old person, right? We don't think that this person has lived a full life. These people have built businesses. They have fought in wars. They have fooled around in the back seat, just like we did, right? They have lived a full life, and we don't see that when we see a senior citizen, right? That's a key to being successful in what I do, is understanding the person holistically. Anyway, my whole point. Sorry, I went off on that tangent, but yeah, this was my very first client, very first day. She ended up moving in, and Frank, thanks for bringing her to me.
And it's something I'll always remember. And Sam talks about culture. That's what he has there.
Yeah.
That's what he has at where he works. And I got to see it from day one. Yeah. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. You know, you're right, Sam. You know, you can't judge a book by its cover. There's somebody in my mother's memory care unit where she's at, and she's this little Filipino woman, and she's close to her 90s. And she was brought out to the United States with the Texaco Petroleum Company. And at 19 years of age, she came to the United States, and she was a chemical engineer, and she was making $19,000 a month. And, you know, this was back then.
19,000.
Yeah. Yes. She said that every time she went to the bank to cash her check, because they didn't have ATMs at the time or any electronic billing, they would ask her, who are you working with? And can we call your employer to verify this check? Okay. And she said, I think they were being prejudiced against me. But like you said, if you were to see her on the street, you'd say, oh, poor lady, she's got memory issues. Maybe she was homeless or whatever. But, you know, the situation was that there's an intelligent person behind that face and history.
You know, this woman who had this whole life, right? And there's a meme of a soldier in World War II. I don't know if you've seen this meme, but it's a soldier in World War II carrying a wounded friend off the battlefield, right? Mm-hmm. And then beneath that picture is the picture of an old man wearing a VFW hat. And the meme is that old fart with the puttering around in the VFW hat is more badass than you will ever be.
I love that.
And that's true.
Yeah. I've seen something like that, that particular one, but
yeah.
I have seen that before.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Anyway, sorry about that.
So my turn?
It's your turn, yeah.
Okay, Sammy, we're going to ask some questions of you.
Sure.
You know, so some are pretty simple, some of them may be complicated.
Okay.
So the first question is, what differentiates an assisted living facility from a board and care?
Okay, good question. So let's start with what a board and care is. So a board and care is a private home that's been modified to accommodate usually 6 residents. An assisted living facility, and I hate the word facility. In my world, we call it the F word. We are a community, not a facility. But the difference between an assisted living community and a board and care is that an assisted living facility tends to provide much more opportunity for socialization, stimulation, and there's usually at least 30 other residents. In a board and care, like I said, there are 6 residents living in a private home. Now, board and care has a place in our world, and I've had families come to see me who they tell me their mom is not a joiner. She never leaves her room. Their only concern is her care. And I'll say, if that's your only concern, then why are you paying for my place? A board and care is going to be a more appropriate fit for your
Mhm.
mom, right?
Yeah.
So that's what a board and care is. It's a private home that's been modified to accommodate a limited number of residents, usually 6. An assisted living community is a much larger building with a larger infrastructure, with a more socialization, more stimulation. I would say a board and care, like I said, a board and care has its place,
Yeah.
but in my opinion, it's for a very specific kind of client.
Okay.
Well
So,
said.
so now that you mentioned that, in terms of activities and socialization, what kind of activities do you offer your residents at an assisted living community?
Sure. Well, it varies, from community to community, right? And it depends on the philosophy of the people running the community. It depends on people like me being on the inside to hold to hold activities to a higher standard. And it also uh, is based on the culture of the community, which we
Mhm.
already talked about, right?
Mhm.
So, I am a huge proponent of 2 things: intergenerational programming and intellectual programming.
Mm.
Because I think in our world, a lot of times we infantilize our residents, or we don't give them enough credit for the intelligence that they have, right? So you'll see a lot of bingo, you'll see a lot of arts and crafts, you'll see a lot of, live entertainment, which isn't bad. We do a lot of live entertainment. But my point is that, you know, that the kind of programming that's provided is dependent on the community that you're talking about.
Okay.
So, my place, we have, and a lot of other communities might have the same programming, but I know for a fact that we do a lot of things differently. But, good programming is designed to improve a resident's quality of life,
Mhm.
physically, emotionally, spiritually, and otherwise, right? That's the point of an assisted living community.
Right.
In addition to taking care of our residents, right? So, so we provide programming, for example, and again, this does not make us unique, but we have exercise classes every morning. We have a chair chi class every Friday, and the guy who runs it is hilarious and fantastic. We have tons of live entertainment, but we also do TED Talks, which
Interesting.
are, educational lectures,
Yeah.
featuring luminaries from all kinds of different fields. I run my social cafe, which is that storytelling and reminiscing group.
Mhm.
Now, I have a background in psychology, so my social cafe not only is storytelling and reminiscing, but sometimes it turns into group therapy. So I can tell you, anyone else can do a storytelling and reminiscing group. They're not going to do it like I do.
Yeah.
And I'll give you an example. I have a resident, my youngest resident, she's 60 years old. At the time of the social cafe, she was 59. Okay, so this is last year. So before she moved to the Terraces, she was a lifelong runner, jogger. She was an executive in the high-end hospitality industry. And about 4 years ago, she had an aneurysm, right, which affected her mobility and it affected her cognition.
Mhm.
Mild, but it affected her cognition. She could not work anymore, right? So one week in Social Cafe, we were talking about sports we played when we were younger, right? So she shared with the group that in high school, she ran track and field. And in her senior year of high school, her team won the Washington State Championship, right? Then she points at her legs and her walker, and she says, "But I can't do those things anymore."
Mm.
And I turned to her and I said, "Carolyn, there are amputees who run marathons, right?" And she said, "Yeah, I know, but I can't do that." And I said to her, "If I find a 5K that I'm willing to walk with you, would you be interested in walking a 5K?" So back in March or April, I forget which month it was, we walked the Angel 5K at the
Wow.
Rose Bowl. It took 3.5 grueling hours. She came in last by a mile, but they kept the finish line up for her.
Oh.
So this is the first time she got to cross the finish line since high school. This is what I'm talking about:
Wow.
culture, This is what I'm talking about when I talk about the passion of the people working in a community and going the extra mile
Yeah.
to not only provide a good environment for their residents, but to give them joy, to give them a feeling of purpose, and to explore outside the box how to make our residents live as full a life as possible.
Yeah.
So they kept the finish line up for her. And when we got back to the community, when we got back to the terraces, unbeknownst to me, right in front of the building, in the lobby, was packed with employees, family members, and residents, all holding up signs, holding balloons, welcoming her back to the community. She cried.
Yeah, exactly.
She gave a speech. And one of the funniest things about the story is that there were so many times she wanted to give up. And I was like, no, we're almost there. We're almost there. The finish line is right around the corner. And we turned the corner and she was like, you said the finish line was going to be around the corner. Where's the finish line? I said, I promise it's around the next corner. And I kept doing that until she got to the finish line. And to hear her tell the story is hilarious, but I was not going to let her give up.
Wow, that's commitment.
And so anyway, so that's some of the programming that we do on top of some of the more traditional programming like live entertainment and exercise and current events and and art classes and those kinds of things. And so I'm a fan. In our industry, I think we do a great job of housing. Generally speaking, we do a great job of housing residents. We do a great job of caring for residents, and we do a great job of providing programming for residents, right? I think where we're lacking is providing residents with a sense of purpose. And so that's where my philosophy, and I'm giving away trade secrets, which I hate, but you're asking me a question. So
share with us.
So, I always offer residents and family members, if they have an area of expertise, if they have a passion that they want to continue to do after moving into the terraces, if they want to teach a class, if they want to run a club, if they want to start a group, not only are we okay with that, we encourage it. And so we will put them on the calendar. We will give them all the materials they need to run a successful program. And that gives residents not only a sense of purpose, but it's peer-to-peer education, right? And peer-to-peer relation, right? And so, for example, I had a resident who was an English professor. And so I asked her if she wanted to run a poetry club. Well, she started running a poetry club, which was wildly popular until her health started to decline, at which time I took over the poetry club. Okay? And we turned it into something else because poetry was kind of fizzling out for our residents. So I started a thing called Literature for Fun 101. And I will spare you all the details of Literature for Fun 101, but it was one of our most popular activities. And that's an example of working off of a resident's passion, which she started, and carrying it on for her after her health precludes her from carrying on any longer.
Right.
So those are some of the activities that are generally provided in senior living. Again, we take a different approach, I think, than most places. And then you got me. And I hate to say it, but I am a differentiator when it comes to communities.
I saw that the first day.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Other people in my position are going to think I'm so arrogant. I'm really not. I just know I'm good at what I do. I love what I do. I have a lot of passion for what I do.
Yeah. And it shows, definitely.
Okay, this is a real simple question we're going to ask.
Yeah.
What's a typical ratio of caregivers to residents in assisted living?
Right. So, that's a question that a lot of families ask, and it varies from community to community, right? So, some communities boast a resident to staff ratio of 5-to-1. That's exceptional. It's very rare, but I've seen it in my 25 years, right? The typical ratio in assisted living, we're not talking about memory care now, because that's a whole different thing, right? The typical ratio in assisted living is usually somewhere between 7 to 10 residents per caregiver.
Okay.
Okay.
And in your particular community, Uh, I know some communities have a nurse on staff. What is the situation at the Terraces?
So our health services director is a nurse,
Okay.
and he oversees both assisted living and memory care. He does have a wellness coordinator who is there when he's not. He lives within walking distance of the community. So he is literally on call 24/7 as long as he's in town. But, we have confidence in the staff under him, that if an emergency arises or if there's an issue, that it will be taken care of properly. But it's not unusual to see our nurse. His name is Dana. It's not unusual to find that Dana has come to the community at 1 a.m. or at 4 a.m.
Right.
to deal with an issue.
Sure.
So most RCFEs they're not required to have a nurse, but for credibility's sake and for resident safety, they should have a nurse.
Okay.
And Dana lives the culture too.
Yeah.
I mean, if Sam's with a client or potential client, and he calls, he needs something from Dana, he'll call Dana down. Dana will come down, introduce himself to the client, and it's all that kind of environment, the friendly environment. So Dana lives it too, just like Sam.
Yeah, and actually, Dana is this larger than life figure who also runs activities like I do. So he is a very musical creature. So he runs a sing along once a month, and he runs a thing called Vintage Live once a month, which is showing music videos from like the 50s and 60s, and then they'll reminisce about the artist or the video
nice.
or
Yeah.
whatever. So we all chip in to run activities because, again, we think outside the box.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So when you're interviewing a prospective resident, or their family members, what are the types of questions you ask of them? Obviously, to find out what it is that their parent needs, or something that'll make the family feel comfortable in placing their loved one at your community.
Right. So, obviously we have to do what I guess you would call it an intake. I hate to use that word because it's so institutional. In my world, we call it discovery. And you're actually discovering about, facts about your potential resident. And that's not only the care that they might need, but it's also hobbies, interests, passions, right? So I, will always ask families and prospective residents, let's start with, first of all, what brings you here today? How can I help you? Why are you considering a change from your current situation, right? That's always the first question. Then you let them talk. Sales is 90% listening. The mistake most salespeople make is they do 90% of the talking.
Right.
Okay. So you ask questions and you let them talk so that you can, so you can learn as much as you can. And, and again, in my background in psychology, as a psychologist, you are trained to sit in uncomfortable silence. And so when you ask a question and there's an uncomfortable silence, you sit with that until you know that they've finished with their point. Because a lot of times you sit in that uncomfortable silence and they'll bring something else up. And you just let them keep talking until they're done, right? So the usual questions are, tell us a little bit about the care needs that you might have. And like I said, and then it's all about what are your interests, passions, likes, dislikes,
Expectations, I would imagine.
your expectations. Yeah. What are you looking for in a community? And I'll ask people, what are the most important characteristics of a community that you're looking for? And if we don't fit that profile, I'll tell them.
Yeah.
One thing about, I've been at the Terraces for 5 years. The previous 20 years that I've been doing this kind of work, I worked in very high-end, very expensive, very luxurious, and very white communities. One thing I love about the Terraces is the diversity, right? And I was working with a family, it was a Latino family, and I was explaining the diversity of our community. And the daughter chimed in and said, I don't think my dad is going to really want diversity. And first of all, I was shocked that she said that. I was shocked she said it, number one, because they were Latino. I was shocked, number two, that she would say that out loud. But number three, I told her, then we're not going to be a fit for you.
Yeah.
We're not going to be a fit for your dad. So you really have to dig into what's going to be a good fit for any given resident, and then willing to let go of that resident if they're not a good fit for your community.
Right. Absolutely.
All right. You've been answering this question since we got here. What differentiates your community, the Terraces, from everybody else?
Yeah. So one answer, one word, culture.
And I already knew that. So.
Yeah. And, culture is defined any number of different ways, and it usually comes from the top down, right? We are family owned. And I'm on the phone every Tuesday with the owner and the CEO. And what I love about that is that, that I get to hear them talk about their philosophy of being a senior living provider. I've worked for nonprofit and I've worked for profit. Now we are for profit, okay? But I have worked nonprofit. What I love about nonprofit is that it's mission driven, right?
Yes.
For profit typically is profit driven.
Right.
And when I'm on the phone with the owner and the owner and the CEO every Tuesday, I get to hear them talk about striking a balance between maintaining a profit, or else we're not going to be in business any longer, right? Maintaining a profit and also properly caring for our residents. And I hear them talk about this every Tuesday.
Yeah.
And I've been lucky enough in my career that when I go in for a job interview, I'm usually interviewing them. Because I will not work for a company that does not share my values.
Sure. Well, of course.
Because my very first job in this business, we had a nurse who was verbally and emotionally abusive to the residents, the family members, and her staff. And I brought this to the attention of the corporate office. Guess what they did? They fired me. Wow. From that moment forward, I made it a point to understand who I was going to work for before I went to work for them. And that's why one of the reasons I love the Terraces is it's family owned. I get what they're going for. We share a vision and we execute on that vision. So culture is the big thing. Sometimes it happens organically. Sometimes it happens because you've got leadership who implement systems and implement expectations that build a culture. I would say our place is a mixture of the two. It's come about organically, but it also has come about because there's an ownership that is invested in that kind of culture. In fact, when I got to the Terraces, our motto was live independently, with assistance. I worked there for about 2 years. On one of these Tuesday phone calls, I said to these guys, I said, how do you like that motto of ours? And one of them said, well, it's been our motto for a long time. We don't have a problem with it. I was like, but do you love it? And the owner said to me, what are you getting at, Sam? And I said, do you mind if I take a crack at a new motto? And they said, of course, come back to us with some ideas next week. So I came up with, it's our culture that sets us apart. And so when I talk about our culture to families, I point out to them that this is our motto. And I don't talk about our culture because it's our motto. I came up with the motto because of my experience in that building every single day. So it's about staff longevity. It's about residents who are open-minded, open-hearted, supportive, and loving of each other. These higher end communities I worked at for 20 years tended to be so cliquish.
Yeah.
The Terraces is a family. We are a true family. And every place can say that. And I've worked for places where that was the philosophy. But I'm telling you right now, the Terraces lives the dream.
Wow.
We are a family. And if you sat in our lobby for an afternoon, you would see residents interact with staff. We joke with each other. We tease each other. We laugh with each other. We cry with each other. It's a family.
Jeez, I'm ready to move in.
I see it.
Yeah, it sounds
since I
extraordinary.
met
It is remarkable.
You mentioned a point that I want to ask you about. We notice just with the fact that where my mother is at, and also places that I visit, that seems to be a lot of turnover of caregivers.
Mhm.
What is the reason for that? Why is it because caregiving is complicated? Is it mentally, physically wearing? What somebody who's immersed in it every day? What is your take on that?
So yeah, so I'll get to turnover in a minute. I do want to say one thing about the Terraces, which is that we opened almost 25 years ago, and we have 3 employees who have been there since we opened
Yeah,
25 years ago.
That's great.
Right?
Yeah.
We have a caregiver who's been there for 21 years. We have 2 dining staff. We celebrated their 20th year of service back in December. I have another employee who's been in there for 19 years, another for 18, a ton who have been there from 10 to 14 years.
Wow.
So this is
Yeah.
part of our culture, right? But my point is that even with this longevity of our employees, turnover, we are not immune to turnover. No place is. And the reason for that, well, it's multifold, right? One reason that there's high turnover is that it's a high burnout profession.
Mhm.
It is hard to be a caregiver. It's taxing mentally, physically, emotionally, and spiritually.
Well, and that's why most families, rely on assisted living communities because they can't deal with it themselves.
Correct.
So,
Right. So that's one reason that it's high turnover. That's a very difficult work. And I gotta give a shout out to all caregivers. And and again, a well-run community will always acknowledge their caregivers
mhm.
with verbal positive reinforcement and other kinds of incentive to make sure they know how appreciated they are because it's such a difficult job. But that being said, so it's high burnout. A lot of times people are using it as a bridge to another job. And a lot of times people are caregivers because they want to be nurses.
Hmm.
So they leave caregiving to go to nursing school.
Okay.
Some of our caregivers are in nursing school. So when they graduate, we're going to lose them
Yeah.
because they're going to become nurses, right? So these are some of the reasons that there's such high turnover
Okay.
among caregivers.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, next question.
Next question.
What's a typical longevity of your residence?
Wow, that's tough. So let's see. That's a difficult question to answer because, you'll get a resident. I've had residents move into my communities over my 25 years who came in with minor health issues, right? And all of a sudden take a rapid turn for the worse.
Mhm.
And out of nowhere, pass away 3 months after they move in. And then, I've got a resident who's lived at the Terraces for how long has she been there? 11 years. So it's really hard to say. My youngest resident, as I said before, my youngest resident is 60. My oldest resident turns 102 tomorrow.
Wow.
I have another resident who turns 102 in a couple of weeks. So the longevity of residents really is tough to put a number on. I will say this, though, about our industry as a whole. There's a ton of research that's been done that has proven that residents who move into an assisted living or a communal living situation tend to live longer and healthier lives than those who remain at home.
Mhm.
And the reason for that is access to immediate care if needed, socialization, stimulation, and a good diet.
Yeah.
Because when seniors stay at home, they are isolated. Usually they're getting in inadequate nutrition, and they're just not getting fed literally, emotionally, socially, spiritually, all those ways.
Yeah.
And I forgot why I even went off in this tangent, but
That happens.
Well, it's like the information I've read about the blue zones, and that's the reason why there is longevity in the blue zones. It's because of the socialization. It's
Right.
because of the nutrition, the diet, and exercise, but mainly the culture.
Mhm.
People have a sense of community, a sense of family, and that's what promotes longevity.
Exactly right.
It's nothing more than that.
Yep.
So when you have a prospective client that comes to you, um, what is the most important advice that you give them when they to select the most appropriate place for their loved one?
Right. So what I tell families is that, when you walk into the right community, you're going to feel it in your gut.
Uh-huh.
Um, and if they get that feeling when they come to the terraces, fantastic. If they get that feeling somewhere else, I always tell families, as long as your loved one is safe and happy and well cared for, that's all I care about.
Mhm.
If it's at the terraces, great. If not, that's okay. So I tell them that they'll feel it when they walk into a place. So I don't know if that's advice, but I do encourage families to, do their research and do their due diligence and look at as many places as they can. One piece of advice I do give families is never to take their loved one to more than 2 places in one day. I would tell them if ideally they would not take their loved one to more than 1 place in one day because it's an information overload.
Yeah.
So number one, this loved one, this mom or this dad or this aunt or whoever is being presented with a huge life decision,
Mhm.
right? So that's number one. Number two, wherever they're going is dumping so much information on this person, right? So they're dealing with the emotional aspect of considering a move out of their house or whatever their current situation is, as if that's not enough on them,
Yeah.
right? Then you're giving them a ton of information about your place. So the best advice I can give is take it slow, go at your loved one's pace. Don't show them more than 1 place in a day if possible. And just, pay attention to your gut.
I like that.
Amen.
That's good.
That's the way to do it.
Yep.
I've got a question I've never asked
Yeah.
before, but how do you determine the cost of the rooms? How do you
Mhm.
how do you do that? I've never asked that question, and I'm interested in knowing how it's done.
Yeah. So that's a great question. So typically, apartments are priced on a number of different factors. So one is size, right? So studios are less expensive than 1-bedroom apartments. 1-bedroom apartments are less expensive than 2-bedroom apartments, et cetera, right? That's just natural, right?
Yeah.
So there's that. But among your studio apartments, your 1-bedroom apartments, your 2-bedroom apartments, then you start to find a variance in pricing based on things like size, location, and view, right?
Mm.
So location could be, something close to the dining room, for example, or something close to an elevator so that a loved one who tires easily doesn't have to walk the entire length of the hallway to get on the elevator, go down for lunch, right? For
Right.
example, right? So, it's those kinds of things that come into play when you're determining the price of an apartment. So it's typically size, location, and view. Those are really the different, determining factors. Another person in my position might give you a different answer, and there might be other factors that I'm not thinking about. But that's been my experience.
And it's interesting. I found that view is really important to people.
To some,
But it's got a great view. Go for it.
and I'll tell you what's hilarious. What I found, my experience is that, the kids will oftentimes, tour communities before they take their loved one out, right? And so, I'll tour the kids. I've worked at places with swimming pools and, full bar and rooftop lounges and like all these crazy fancy places. And I'll tour the kids and they're like, you have a swimming pool. Mom has to see this place. And then they bring mom back and they're like, Mom, there's a swimming pool. And mom's like, I haven't been in a pool in 30 years. I won't go in that pool. So families have a much different idea about what their loved one might like than their loved one.
Uh-huh.
And so that's the other thing. When families are looking, make sure your loved one has a sense of ownership in the decision. Because that's one of the reasons seniors oftentimes will resist the process because they feel like they're being forced to do something. Now, sometimes residents sadly need to be forced to do something, right? Because they're in their home by themselves. They're not safe in their homes by themselves. And in-home care is super expensive, right? So sometimes residents have to be, I don't want to say forced, but the family and somebody in my position have to get them to understand that for their safety and their quality of life, that they can no longer remain in the home.
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
So what was the question? I go off on these tangents.
No, you've already answered it. But how do you determine the price of a room? You've already answered it. So
Yeah. So
I'm good with your answer.
yeah. So, but anyway, so same goes with the view. Some kids will come in and they'll see the view and they're like, oh, mom's going to love this view. And then mom doesn't care about a view. So, so anyway.
Okay. This is a philosophical question coming at you. With the influx of baby boomers coming, what is the availability and affordability of the future of assisted living communities?
Okay, that's a great question. So, so I don't know the exact stats, but something like by 2025, the majority of the country will be 65 and older. I don't know what the statistic is, right? But we have a huge boom coming, right? In assisted living. So availability is lacking.
Mm-hmm.
I have a waiting list. I know that there are other communities that have a waiting list. And so I think we're going to see a boom in construction of new assisted living, number one. When you talk about affordability, I used to think that when it came to senior living, you get what you pay for. And I've learned that could not be further from the truth. Now, there is some truth in that. You don't want to move into a place that gives you the creeps, right? But again, the Terraces far exceeds any of these fancy places I worked at before in terms of culture, heart, energy, all those things, right? And we're a lot less expensive than a lot of these places, right? But there are a range of costs and quote products out there in terms of assisted living. Some are going to be a lot nicer than others, but most people can find affordable senior living, and if they can't, there are options, right? So I'll give you an example. There's a program in California called the Assisted Living Waiver Program, right? Mm-hmm. And as long as you're on Medicare and Medi-Cal, you will qualify for an assisted living waiver facility. Now, an assisted living waiver facility, that's one of those places that's going to be less expensive, and they might take a portion of your Social Security. I'm not sure how it all works. I'm not sure of all the details.
Right.
But as long as you have Medicare and Medi-Cal, you've got a roof over your head, right? So that's the good news.
Right.
Okay. But these are not going to be the nicest places in the world.
No, they're not.
Right. Yeah. So, but my point is, and I've had 2 residents run out of money. I had one resident run out of money because she, did not manage her money well. She did not have a family that was very involved. And so it was on me to help place her. And so skilled nursing places and rehab places, many of them have a long-term option. But again, you have to be on Medicare and Medi-Cal.
Okay.
So I helped place this resident actually at this skilled nursing place right next door in my building.
Oh, damn.
So I still go over and visit her. Her last name is Cooper, and we all called her Coop. So I go over, and she's always sitting in the lobby, and I'm like, "Hey, Coop, how you doing today?" And so I still visit her next door. I have another resident who was actually taken in a romance scam. So she was 80 years old. She was pretty young spirited and young looking. And she was on Facebook, and she met a guy on Facebook who caught her in his web by telling her how much in love he was with her, how beautiful she was. And I'm just going to repeat what I said before. Do you know how intoxicating that is for an 80-year-old woman?
Yeah.
Shame on this guy.
Yeah.
So on top of falling in love with her and all that, I'm also building a church, and I need money for the church. This guy wiped her out.
Yeah.
So I ended up helping her find an assisted living waiver facility. Okay, so these are the options when you don't have money, or if you don't have the means to pay for something nicer.
And you helped her with the assisted living waiver.
Why
correct?
wouldn't I?
No, but I'm telling you, that's very complicated. It's
Yes.
a very complicated process.
Yes.
So for you to do something like that for one of your residents is way above and beyond, in my view.
Well, thanks for saying so. I think my background in psychology, I take on more of a social worker role in my building than most people in my position.
Yeah.
Thank God I've got the luxury of doing that. Not everybody does. I've had jobs where I didn't have the luxury to do that. I was too busy. I was under too much pressure, but and that's the part of the job I love. I tell every family, if all I had to do was sell, I'd find something else to do.
Yeah. Well, that leads me to my last question to you, Sam. It's no question you have a lot of excitement and love for what you do, and it's rare because it's you have a different philosophy of how you go about it. You're not a salesman. You're more of a counselor.
Right.
You provide the guidance.
And I got to see that on the first day I met him.
and Frank saw that.
Yeah.
But we all have a story, and I want to just finish up with here and ask you, because you do have a great passion for what you do. Why? How did you get into this?
So I was actually almost done with my master's in psychology, and a friend of mine approached me. I had most of my hours done, like I was right there. And a friend of mine approached me and said that her husband ran an assisted living place, and she thought I would be perfect for the job, and would I be interested in going in for a job interview? And I said, well, I'm kind of getting my master's in psychology. I wasn't really thinking senior living. And she said, just go in for the interview. So, as I thought about going in on this interview, I was doing my hours, and my dream was to hang a shingle and have a private practice, right? And I don't know if people understand the number of hours it takes to get to that place, to that level of success, to have a private practice, and that's thriving, and a private office, right? Or at home office, whatever. And I went on this interview, and what this guy told me was that my background in psychology would come in handy in senior living, and that I would be able to make a very good living from day one. And I said, you know what? I'll give it a try, right? So he passed me along to the corporate person who ended up hiring me, right? And I found that, we're working with families who are in distress. We're working with families in transition. We're working with families in crisis. We're working with residents who have all kinds of psychopathologies like anxiety, depression, right? All those kinds of things. I am the perfect. A background in psychology is
right
perfect.
down your alley.
It's perfect for what I do.
Yeah.
And that's why I bring a different dimension to what I do than most people who sit in my chair.
Wow.
And I'm blessed to be able to do it.
Well, it certainly shows.
Thank you.
And we appreciate your time and effort coming here today to speak with us and
Thanks for having me.
share your knowledge with us and our audience. You've given us inspiration. Had I known about you guys before, I don't know that my mom would be where she's at right now. I could kick myself, but again, I just want to thank everybody for joining in with us. Sam Baum, he's the Community Relations Director at the Terraces at Park Merino. And we just appreciate your time here with us and sharing your knowledge and Frank, do you have anything you'd like to say?
I just thank you, brother. You know, I've known you for all these years. So,
You've been a good friend, Frank, and thanks for having me today. And I look forward to
amen, brother.
our continued partnership and friendship.
Amen.
So,
Amen. Thank you,
All right.
Sammy.
Well, thank you, Sam. We appreciate it.
thank you.